welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. I've been doing this podcast since September of 2012, and boy, are my lips tired. This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. And literally, as I started that intro, my computer started to do some sort of an update thing. So hopefully, this is all going to hang together.
You
I
hope so.
just froze up like, whoa, what is going on here? But no, I think we're okay for the moment. You know, if I disappear, John, you'll know what happened. I'll be back. You just hang out for a bit.
Okay, no worries, no worries.
But anyway, welcome to LOA Today. And we are once again blessed with a guest who is into some stuff that we haven't actually talked about in quite some time here on the show. His name is John Moore. And John is a shamanic practitioner and teacher. And we haven't talked about shamanism really since Tom Wells was a co-host, which goes back about 4 years ago, something like that, because he used to talk about it fairly extensively. So I think we've made reference to it a few times since then, but this is like a good, this is like a revisit. So
Nice. Well, it's spring. It's spring, officially spring.
yep,
So
officially.
nice to nice to revive new life into the
Absolutely.
shamanic conversation.
Yeah. So anyway, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Yeah,
And
thanks
tell
for
us
having me.
tell us a little bit about how you got involved in shamanism.
Yeah. So I spent 25 years working in technology. So I have kind of
Oh,
an
you and me
interesting.
both.
Yeah, I have kind of an interesting background, and there's this concept in shamanism of the shamanic crisis, which is usually a health crisis that strikes people in indigenous cultures, that actually marks you as, oh, you've gone through some stuff, you're ready to go into training as a shaman. So I went through a health crisis in my early 40s, and was doing everything I could to take care of that, seeing doctors, naturopaths, taking supplements, exercising, uh, doing everything I could to take care of my health, my diet. And I was meditating. I've been a meditator my whole life.
Wow,
And
nice.
I should say up front, had zero knowledge of shamanism. Like the word, I had heard the word, didn't know what it was about. And I was sitting in my basement, which is where my meditation space was. I had a finished basement, and sitting on the floor and meditating. And I heard a voice. It sounded like a male voice. It sounded like it was coming from outside of my head. And it said, "You need to learn shamanism." And it was very forceful. It was very startling.
What was your first reaction? I don't even know you. What are you talking about?
It was a weird, like, where'd that come from? And then my next reaction was, I live in Maine. I live in Maine in the Northeast, and I don't live in Peru. I don't live in,
I gotta ask you, by the way,
Siberia.
my wife's family is from northern Maine. Where about in Maine are you?
Oh, I'm in southern Maine. I'm just
Oh, southern
outside of
Maine.
Portland. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, actually, she lived in Portland for a bit and in Augusta, but her family's from way up near Fort Fairfield, up in that area, Prescott.
Oh yeah, that's
Yeah,
that's up
like
there. That's like
way up. Yeah,
5 hours from here. Yeah.
that's Canadian border up there.
Yeah. Yeah. It really, there's not, other than the border, there's not much difference between Canada and the
Right.
US.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway, sorry, I just had to ask. It was
Oh,
kind of,
no
kind of a
worries.
curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely. Always good to connect with someone who is Mainer adjacent.
My wife
um,
my wife says that you guys are maniacs.
yeah, I do sometimes use that term.
Mhm. It's a term
So
of honor, by the way, for those who aren't familiar with it. It's a term of honor.
yeah, in fact, the our Air National Guard unit here are the, or at least were at one point, the maniacs, the whatever,
Oh, really?
something and something unit maniacs, spelled MAINEIACS. So
Gotta love
yeah,
it.
it's a term that, yeah, people use. So
Yep.
people from here use that. So I was living here, living here in Maine, and this voice, and I said, learn shamanism. Like, what's up with that? It wasn't go see a shaman. It wasn't have a shamanic healing. It was,
Mm.
you have to learn shamanism. And so I Googled, and I found out that Maine actually has a really vibrant, active shamanic community.
Really?
Some really fantastic teachers here. Some people who have written extensively about shamanism live up here. I think we're so close to nature, and just in daily life, that we, it's and we also have a healthy distrust of authority. So we there are a lot of people who practice shamanism up here. There are a lot of people who don't have a shingle out as shamanic healers or teachers who are still practicing shamanism as an individual path. So I did wind up finding my teacher, and she's amazing. She's unfortunately retiring from, well, unfortunately for other people, but fortunately for her retiring from teaching this year.
Wow.
And she's still active. She's still seeing clients. She's writing. She's doing all kinds of things. But teaching was taking it takes a lot out of you. And so I called her up and I said, I think I need to learn shamanism, and I have no idea what it is or whatever. And she said to me, there's usually this intro class you have to do, and you just missed my last one. So I was like, okay, well, I guess that's it. She's like, well, if you come talk to me and you come meet with me in my office, and we'll email back and forth, and you fill out an application and you do all of this work in advance, I may be able to accept you into an apprenticeship.
Mm-hmm.
So I did all of that, and I jumped through hoops, and she took me in into an apprenticeship, which is in this case a year-long training program. And I started out, I had no intention ever of working with anybody else. This is just for my own healing, just for my own sake. And the universe kind of had other plans. And
not surprising. I mean, you got a voice that says, you have to go do this. They had something in mind, obviously.
Right. Yeah, it's like, this isn't just about you. Don't think this is just about you. And so I did about 7 years. I think all told about 7 years of training, which is a lot. I mean, includes, I did 2 years of teacher training. I did 2 years of initiatory training, and I did a bunch of specialized work. I wouldn't work as a healer. I wouldn't set myself out as a shamanic practitioner before I'd done. There's a bunch of stuff that I felt like I needed to learn before I could work with other people. And it took me a while to get all of that under my belt. And because stuff comes up when you're working with somebody else, and they come to you and they, might have a spirit attached to them. And if you don't know how to deal with that, it's not a great situation. So I got a lot of stuff under my belt, and I've been doing this, as a practitioner for a few years. I've been teaching. I taught intro classes for a few years, and went through 2 years of training to be able to teach more advanced topics in shamanism. And now I'm sort of kind of developing some of my own classes as well that I hope to launch this year at some point. Nice. Some more specialized topics. So
very good.
That's my story.
So now you also have to give us an idea from your perspective. What is shamanism? What is it all about?
Yeah. So I like to say shamanism is kind of three things. So first of all, it's a set of spiritual practices for healing and information that are common across cultures all over the world and have been around for at least tens of thousands of years. We can gather from cave paintings and rock carvings, and even the oldest shamanic headdress found was in the UK, and it dates from the Holocene, so from 11,000 years ago. So there's that. So there is this spiritual set of practices. The main practice is journeying. There's also a shamanic worldview, which is animistic. We believe that there's spirits in everything. The spirits surround us, and there's spirits in the rocks and the trees, not just the birds and the bees and the people. So there's that aspect as well. And the worldview involves this idea that we're interconnected. We're all connected to everything. And this is really common when you see the world tree represented across cultures, right? The ancient Kabbalah from the Jewish faith has a tree of knowledge, and the Norse had the Yggdrasil, the world tree, and this is common around the world as well. And it's about this interconnection between sort of heaven, earth, and man. And the third component is this impulse. And this is, this shamanic archetype that is an impulse to awaken in response to crisis, in response to shamanic crisis. And there's a huge resurgence of shamanism going on right now. Tons of tons of people are interested in learning, and tons of people are seeking out practitioners for healing. And in my experience, this is in part because we've just gone through 2 years of a pandemic, two
Sure.
plus years of a pandemic. Now that, political divisions and war and all of these things, there's a lot going on that has upset the world balance.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of awakening happening. There's a lot of people who are experiencing this impulse to awaken spiritually. And so those three things really make up my sort of constellation of what constitutes shamanism.
And especially the what you were describing as the spiritual side, very similar to many viewpoints that have been expressed here on this program, that I've expressed, that many people advocate. I say that because it seems like in what I will generically call spiritual circles, everybody's converging on the same thing from a wide variety of angles, which is
Yeah,
really interesting.
yeah. Many paths to the same mountaintop. I think that's a
Yeah,
Zen saying, right?
yeah, yeah, right.
And in Huna, which is sort of a westernized version of Hawaiian spirituality, there's a saying that not all truths come from the same school. So
Same
yeah,
thing.
I do think people converge on the same thing. And when you strip everything away, ultimately it's all the same thing. When you strip away ceremony and words and dogma and any of that stuff, it's all the same thing. And not to
Right.
say that we need to strip away that stuff. I think that I love ceremony, I love ritual, I love learning all the words associated with shamanism and different cultures and how they view things and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
But underneath it all, we're all the same. We're all doing the same thing underneath it all.
And then you made reference to how you originally got started in part because of the voice, but there was also a crisis you went through. And tell us how that resolved.
Yeah. So in my early 40s, I was, and I had no idea this was even a thing. To show you how ignorant I was of everything. So I was
You're not the
diagnosed.
only one, my friend. I mean, you should talk to me 10 years ago. Like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm talking about. But I'm going to start a podcast. So,
But ignorance is a great place to start, because it's that whole beginner's mind thing from Zen as
Mm,
well, right? So if you
mhm,
think you're an expert, you think you don't have a lot to learn. So beginner's mind, you have all kinds of things to learn.
sure.
And so I was diagnosed with PTSD, and it took a long time for that to happen, because I was experiencing not just mental health symptoms but physical symptoms. I had lost 60 pounds in less than 2 months.
Ooh,
I wasn't sleeping. I was having trouble keeping food down. It was a real health crisis
yeah.
on all levels of my being. So it was obviously a spiritual crisis, a mental crisis, an emotional crisis. You know, trauma affects your ability to pay attention to things. There's an attentional aspect to it. So a lot of people who we think have ADD actually might be experiencing repercussions from trauma.
Mm.
And so saw a therapist, and they're like, well, there's no cure for this thing. I was like, well, that sucks. Why am I doing it? Why am I doing
Thanks
anything
so
about it?
much. Right. Yeah.
Right,
Where do I write
thanks.
the check out to?
There's no cure. How it resolved itself is that I've been living symptom free for years.
Nice.
And consequently, the nice thing, not to say that there's a nice thing to experiencing PTSD, but the nice thing about going through it and recovering from it is that in the beginning of my practice, 100% of my clients came to me with trauma for the first couple of years that I was in practice. Um, and I explain it as there's this wound resonance. These people, they can sense this guy's been through some of the same things that I've been through. This guy understands it. This guy gets it. Oh, and this guy, who's not any smarter than I am, not any more special than I am, is living symptom free. right? I'm
Mm.
not smarter than anybody else. I don't have, special insight, or, I wasn't, I've developed intuitively over time, but I wasn't particularly clairvoyant or psychic, or any had spiritual gifts to start out with. It's all just effort on my part. So, the nice thing is that the wound becomes the medicine, right? This wound, and healing the wound, and when you heal yourself, you really do kind of start to heal the world as well. um, and so when people started coming to me with trauma, I was like, okay, well, I guess this is where, I'm supposed to be working with other supposed to be
Mm.
working with other people. People come to me for a variety of reasons now, but for like 2 years anyway, um, you know everybody came to me with symptoms of trauma.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, and which you would easily recognize because you went through it. So
Right.
maybe
Yeah.
maybe that's why you kind of got started that way. It's it's like a law of attraction thing, right? The more that you focus on something, the more of you get it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. And from the recognition perspective, I had a young man come to me as a client, and I don't give away identifying client information, but I'll just say he was a young man. And I always ask him, like, what brought you to me? And he said, I just feel dead inside. I don't know what's going on. And so I was like, oh, my trauma bells went off in the back of my head. Oh, this is what this is about. And so I was like, so do you ever dissociate? He goes, no, I don't dissociate. I was like, well, do you ever feel like the world isn't real, or you're not quite in your body? And he's like, oh yeah, all the time. I was like, okay, so that's dissociation. And he goes, well, I don't have any like trauma or anything. I'm like, okay, um,
I
that's
love it.
fine.
I
He
love
goes,
that. I mean, it shows just how powerful the human mind is. We can literally convince
yeah,
ourselves of anything, which is
yeah,
pretty. It's
yeah.
cool in one sense.
Yeah, and I didn't remember a lot of my life. Like, I didn't, until all of this came to a head, I had no idea a bunch of this stuff went on. And even then I was like, am I just making this up? And then I got confirmation from people who were there when these things in my life happened,
Oh,
that yeah, this did indeed happen. And in fact, it was worse than you even think it was. It was like,
wow!
wow, that's the mind is amazing. It
It
is
is.
really, really amazing. It is trying to protect us,
Mhm.
um, with our trauma responses. However, those are not so adaptive when they are present outside of outside of those experiences. So that's where the work comes in.
Yeah, and the work is important to do. It's also one of those topics that's a little bit. I don't want to say controversial. It makes it sound a bigger deal than it is. There's disagreement. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
There's
Yeah.
there's pleasant, friendly disagreement. On the one hand, there is a camp of people, the larger camp. I'll generically call it the therapeutic camp.
Hmm.
It's the camp that says when you have something like this that's been going on for a while, you can't ignore it. You have to go and do something about it, clear it out before you can, you have to get the blocks out of the way before you can go on with your life. There's the other camp, which is a much smaller camp that says you don't have to clear any of that stuff out. What you really have to do is just keep replacing it with what you like instead, and what feels better, and what heals you. And I'm curious to know. I mean, it's a minor point in some ways, but what do you think about that one?
I think I fall somewhere in the middle, as I do with many things.
Okay.
I do think so. There is a shamanic treatment for trauma, which is called soul retrieval, and it really is about helping the person make themselves whole again. It's not about clearing out trauma as much as it is reconstituting yourself. And shamans have been doing this for thousands of years. But in psychological terms, when many therapists talk about trauma, they talk about the fracturing of the self. Well, we're using different language, but we're talking about the same thing. And so we try to repair that fracture. I thought when I first started treatment for trauma, I thought I got to remember everything or I can't heal from it. And that is absolutely not true. And I probably did way more. I probably delayed my healing for a really long period of time
Mm,
trying to remember everything that happened to me.
mhm,
You don't have to remember to heal from it. And there are lots of pathways to approach healing. I'm not saying that shamanism is the only path. Um, it is one path, and it works great in combination with other things. including doing physical work, because a lot of trauma is stored in the body as well. But it's not, it's interesting because I talked to a lot of therapists who are very spiritually minded. And, some of them will tell you trauma is a disease of the soul. It is a spiritual thing. Like, we've had such a hard time putting our thumb on it.
Mm.
Is it in the body? Is it in the mind? Is it, where is it located? And, treating the person as a whole, which includes mind, body, soul, spirit, energy system, all of that stuff, in my experience, is you're kind of firing on all cylinders, to use a car metaphor.
Sure.
You're getting the best of all worlds.
Okay, very interesting. So we've kind of got the lay of the land now. We've kind of laid out the parameters of the thing. So let me just go directly to today. Right now, you're in the middle of your life. You came onto the LOA Today podcast, and
Hmm.
you're excited to talk. What are you talking about? What are you thinking about? What are you working on these days?
Gosh, so many things, so many things these days. So I do have a podcast of my own, and I talk primarily about shamanism, but I do sometimes have other guests on to talk about other things. I'm in talks to start um, a program amongst shamanic practitioners,
Hmm.
because healers need self care, and the healers need
Oh
to be
yeah,
healed as well.
yeah.
That's something that a lot of people miss, and they get burned out over time
Hmm.
from not taking care of themselves. So, in talks with another shamanic practitioner who lives up here to start hosting something monthly or twice a month to do that. But I really am looking. I loved teaching in person. I do a lot of mentoring one on one over Zoom and that sort of thing, and that worked out really well during the pandemic. I'm really excited to get back into teaching in person. Looking at ways to do that safely. The pandemic has not left us, so it's still around, and I need to be able to do that safely. I went to a healing circle the other night, and I'm gonna borrow from her some of her procedures for helping everybody stay safe and feel safe who went to that event as well. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to teaching. I'm going to try to schedule a couple of intro classes coming up, which I love teaching intro to shamanism. Um, and I've got some advanced topics I'm working on as well that nobody else is teaching yet. So
Nice.
I have a background in information security, and
Hmm.
I also taught martial arts for about 20 years, and
Yeah, I
so
saw that
I
on
have.
your profile. That's an interesting combination. I mean, have you ever had to use the jujitsu with dealing with a stray spirit? I mean, I don't know how you would do that, but I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, the jujitsu mindset is about redirection. It's not about direct opposition, right?
Hmm.
So if you're familiar at all with jujitsu or judo, um, it's different than what we call hard style martial arts, which is like a direct punch to the face.
Right, right.
Um, but the mindset of jujitsu is really like applies itself to so many things, including working with spirits. Very frequently, if I'm doing like a space clearing, for example, like somebody has a house that's haunted, I'm not going to go in there and exorcise the spirits. I'm going to work with them to try to help them go where they're supposed to be. One of the things I like about shamanism is that we don't treat spirits as either subservient or enemies. We treat them
Mm,
as clients. If
really
it's a stuck
interesting.
spirit, if it's a suffering spirit, even if somebody has what we call a possessing being, which is a spirit that's really attached itself to them, we treat them like a client because they're suffering. They're not where they're supposed to be. And very frequently, when we run into what we might consider ghosts, I guess, so stuck spirits, um, when you think about that existence, living for however long and not being able to interact with anybody around you, that's horrible.
Mm.
That's so
Movies have been made
being.
about that.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Movies have been made about that.
Yeah, so like The Sixth Sense, right? I won't give away
Hmm.
the end of The Sixth Sense if anybody
Right.
has missed it in the past, however
Like
long
20
that came
years.
out,
Yes.
20 years ago. But but the movie is about these ghosts, and the kid says, frequently the dead people don't know they're dead.
Hmm.
And I have experienced that. That is an honest thing that happens. And they are, they're suffering because they're stuck, and they're sometimes living the same thing over and over again, and they can't interact with the people around them, and they desperately want to. So using a jujitsu mindset, not the combative aspects, because that wouldn't work against the spirit, but being able to go in and redirect, and to have a sense of energy. And one of the things that jujitsu really teaches you is sensing energy, even though it may be physical energy, but being able to determine what your opponent's about to do before they do it
Hmm.
by sensing their energy, and that helps a whole lot in any kind of spiritual work.
Very good. And since we're kind of talking about the paranormal, which is something that's included in your profile, but it's something that really wasn't part of the original discussion anyway, at least from the way I was thinking about it.
Sure,
Let's explore that a little bit.
sure,
Let's
yeah.
talk about first. Let's define the term, because I think it means a little bit something a little bit different for every person. And let's just talk about some of your experiences that you've had, because I'm sure they'll be fascinating.
Yeah, I've got a real funny one.
Okay.
um, so paranormal. I mean, it's hard. It's a little bit hard for me to define, because every day, shamans always work with spirits. So we always work with helping spirits, and so I encounter spirits every day in my work, and so that isn't necessarily paranormal for me. But what sort of strikes me is when there are effects in physical reality that I can experience, that other people can experience, that are really, really unusual. And then it is
Hmm.
hard. It can be really hard for sort of deceased people to affect material reality. It can happen, but it requires a great deal of energy. And um, so I had an experience. I was in training years and years ago, and I started out my training, and I had a little bear totem that I brought with me to place on the altar in the training circle that I was in. And when I left, I couldn't find it. It kind of disappeared. And so I got home and I emailed everybody who was in the class, and I said, "Oh, did anybody see this little bear totem? It is from a tribe in the west coast of the U.S. And it's quite." It's quite a dear thing for me to own, and I can't find it." And people are like, "No, I didn't see it." And somebody went back and looked for me, and then I drove back with a flashlight and looked in
Hmm.
the parking lot and couldn't find it. And then a week or so later, I went into a car that I hadn't been in the intervening time, and there was something wrapped up on the floor of the driver's side of the car, in a paper that I'd never seen before with printing on it. And I unwrapped it, and there was my bear totem. So how it got there, I don't know. But my first thought wasn't, this is a spiritual occurrence. This is something, because stuff doesn't just disappear and reappear every day. That's paranormal to me, if that actually happened.
Well, there's some physicists who might say different, but I understand what you're
Sure,
talking
yeah,
about.
there's
Yeah.
quantum tunneling
Right.
happens all the time with electrons. So yeah, we're
Entanglement, all that stuff,
every
string theory.
we're constantly teleporting. We just not usually that far. um, uh, so then there was, so I, at the time I was, working on my laptop, and my laptop disappeared. And it was really weird, because I worked on it. So it wasn't, and I looked all over the house, and I was the only one in the house. My wife at the time was away, and my kids were in school. And I searched high and low everywhere, and I went up to take a shower. And I remember on my way into the shower, there was a table, and I had put my hand on the table, and looked down at it, and went and took a shower. When I came out, my laptop was on the table where I had placed my hand.
Ooh.
So this happened over and over again, stuff like this. My daughter took off her shoes in the car on our way to a restaurant. When we got to the restaurant, the shoes were gone. We tore the car apart. The window hadn't been open. The door hadn't been open. The shoes, never found the shoes. Never.
Never found them. Okay.
Never found them ever. They did not reappear.
So
And so,
some rock spirit somewhere is wearing these little,
yeah,
you know,
they're
these little
cute. They
pink
were pink.
shoes. Yeah.
she was about, I don't know how old she was, about 8. So they're small. So maybe, maybe a little elf or something. Um, so I was going in to go do some training later, after all this was happening. I was finally going, okay, there's, and, lots of paranormal activity was around my family at that time. It was like all coming to a head. My wife was seeing beings in the house while she was sleeping. My kids were waking up to noises, like all kinds of stuff. It's like, all right, I think something's going on here.
Yeah.
So I went to a class. I was taking a class in depossession, which we don't exorcise spirits. We depossess. We work with them as clients. And so I was taking this class, and I went to the teacher, and I said, all this stuff's happening. My stuff is disappearing and reappearing, and things are moving. And the radio in my car changed the station on its own on my way over here. And electronics are failing in weird ways, and all kinds of stuff. She's like, I don't think that's, all that stuff's probably happening, but I don't think it's what you think it is, because, for that to happen spiritually, like, that requires so much energy. I don't know where that would come from. So it's probably like your kids doing stuff, or, whatever. So I said, okay,
That's interesting.
okay, that's fine. I don't know if I believe that, but, I'm just telling you my experience. So we were in class, and we were sitting in this really tight circle watching the teacher demonstrate something. And so all of my stuff was 10 feet behind me. And, when you train in shamanism, you have a lot of stuff. You've got a drum and a rattle and all kinds of stuff. My rattle on its own starts shaking itself. Right. So everybody, 20 people in the class, are like looking at this rattle shaking itself. The woman sitting next to me looks at me and says, "What the bleep is that?" Next
Right.
thing I go, "Yeah, it's my rattle. It's okay. Don't worry about it." So, so after the class, the teacher came back and goes, "Okay, that's happening. Okay, that's going on. It's
The
really."
teacher now believes. Hooray!
Yeah, I was like, okay, well, I didn't really need it, but some confirmation there. So over the years, stuff like that, strange stuff appearing, disappearing, things going places. I've gotten real used to it. So it's not as paranormal, but I would say it does surprise me when physical things happen like that.
Yeah.
That can
Well,
be pretty surprising.
I think we have this. I don't know if it's a individual. I don't think it's individual. I think it's cultural or societal or a species belief. I'm not sure exactly where it is in there. Somewhere in that range, there's a belief that if it happens physically, that's important.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Because
I'm to the point now where I'm really wondering if that's true. But I can tell I subscribe to it. I still, if something physical happens, I'm like anybody else. Oh, whoa, what was that?
right, that's real. You can't deny it. I didn't make this
Yeah,
up. There's,
right.
there's physical proof, which is, the interesting thing about shamanism is that we travel in spiritual realms that are frequently overlaid with physical reality.
Mm.
So when we journey, which is, really entering an altered state of consciousness and doing the work that we do, um, the world's crowded. It's way more crowded than we think it is. There are spirits everywhere. It's like Grand
Mhm.
Central Station, even where I live out in the woods of Maine. It's, there are all kinds of beings around. And, when I love teaching people the first time we do this, it's called middle world journey. When you journey into the spiritual overlay of physical reality, I'm like, you're going to run into some folks here, and it's okay. Just, give them some precautions to take so they don't pick up hitchhikers. And they're like, there were people everywhere, we non-human people, but and it's not just ghosts. There's, all of these, every culture in the world has little people. I don't know if you've
Mhm.
noticed that, right?
Yes.
In Hawaii, they have the menehune. In Ireland, they have leprechauns. In Scandinavia, they have elves and trolls. And in Western Africa, they have contemple. And there's every culture has little people, these little
Mhm.
spiritual beings that have, superhuman abilities that sometimes manifest to people. Sometimes they're tricksters. Sometimes they're helpers. um they're everywhere. Just different cultures have different names for them.
Also, as you were describing that little scenario, as you were going through that, it occurs to me the word shaman. There are lots of different kinds of shaman around the world, and African shaman are known as being a little different from others, if you know what I mean. For instance, the idea of a shaman cursing somebody, that's like right out of African
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know. I don't even know what the question is. How do you reconcile that with what you're talking about? I guess that's the best way to ask it.
So because shamanism is cross cultural, it exists in many many different cultures, more cultures than it doesn't. um there's always cultural overlay with that, right? So a shaman in Peru might do something different than a shaman in Siberia, and the
Hmm.
word shaman comes from Siberia, so the word's not even going to be the same. We just borrowed it into English in the 17th century.
Mm.
So we don't have another word, so we use shaman for quote unquote medicine man, but it's a little bit different. um so yeah, so cursing is really big in Africa, and shamans have spiritual battles they back and forth in Africa between each other to prove who's the better shaman, or to steal business from the other one, or whatever reason. um I think it's a bad idea. Like, who wants to get into any kind of war with anybody, spiritual or otherwise? It's not to say, so, there's this idea that is a very modern Western idea that curses come back to you three times over,
Mm.
right? So when you do harmful cursing or magic or energy towards somebody, that it comes back three times over. Well, that's a really new belief, and that's a really it's dogmatic in some systems of belief that that's going to occur. I do think that there's karma, but I think it's more instantaneous than that. So, like, if I start a magical war with somebody, we're both going to suffer. We're both
Mm.
already going to suffer. And if I'm in the position where I want to do that, I'm already suffering because I'm already not happy. So karma to me is pretty instantaneous. um so I guess I reconcile that by just by saying, like, it is a norm. And if you look at a lot of sort of spiritual forms of spirituality that have come out of Africa, so and been blended with other cultures. So um hoodoo and voodoo come to mind, for example, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
um there's a lot of cursing there. Not cursing language wise, but
Right, right.
cursing other people.
Yeah.
And I talked to a hoodoo practitioner one time who was telling me a story about a woman who tried to curse somebody to death, and it didn't happen, and she didn't, and she wondered why. And later, that person wound up saving a child from a fire or something like that. Right? So there was
Mm.
a reason why that death curse didn't work, or something. But you know, yeah, I wouldn't, I don't want to kill anybody. I don't want to harm anybody. How unhappy would I have to be to want to kill or harm somebody else?
Mm.
Um, so I'm already in a state of suffering, and then I'm just going to increase that. And then if I get into a war with somebody who can do stuff back to me, um, that's not where I want to be either. So,
Yeah, the John Lennon title "Instant Karma is going to get you" just came to mind as you were saying
yeah,
what you were saying there,
yeah,
and I guess it really is that quick, really, which is perhaps a surprise
uh
in
huh,
some ways to some people. Certainly is to me, on some level. On another level, it's not a surprise at all, um, because I've always believed that just because I don't always manifest exactly what it is that I want immediately when I want it doesn't mean that it's not possible to do. And there are
sure,
times when I haven't been able to. I think everybody's experienced that. One thing I am curious about, though, and this is a topic that's kind of near and dear to my heart, because I've engaged in discussion and debate with a lot of people, not so much on the show, but off the show, actually, on this
hmm,
topic. And that, well, on the show too, to an extent. And that's the idea of, can you actually, well, there's a lot of ways to say it. Can you manifest for somebody else? Can you curse somebody else? Can you actually impose your will on somebody else? And there's like a range of beliefs about that one. I mean, we were talking earlier about how all that's kind of dovetailing from a variety of different angles and ideas, but there are also some variations, and this is one of them. There are some people who strongly believe you can basically hurt somebody else spiritually, and there are other people who say no, you can't. I mean, one of my co-hosts has actually said he experienced a shaman who tried to curse him, and the way he ended up breaking it, first he had to deal with the fact that that was what was happening, and then once he realized what was happening, he basically asked for Jesus's help, and that broke the curse. So
sure,
it was just it was like both. On the one hand, the other person was harming him. On the other hand, he didn't get away with it. So I'm curious to know what your view is on this. How does this actually play out in your mind?
Yeah, so cursing is a real thing, and there are many different kinds. And I define cursing as any sort of spiritual action that's meant to harm somebody else.
Hmm.
It's a really broad, generic term. Um, and one form of cursing that I can talk about from experience, and very dangerous, can cause physical harm to people, and exists in many different cultures, is the evil eye. And we think about, like, oh, giving somebody the stink eye, or whatever,
Hmm.
that's the evil eye. The evil eye is something different. The evil eye is, it seems to be an inborn ability in some people, and some people do it without knowing they can do it.
Hmm.
And it's fueled by really powerful negative emotions like anger or jealousy or hatred.
Hmm.
And with the gaze, they can actually burn a hole in your energy system, and that can make you sick. It can make you depressed. It can make you more, it can, like, if you can conceive of a luck as an energy, and it is conceived as an energy in many spiritual systems, it can affect your luck, so that mishaps happen to you more frequently, or you lose your job, or your house burns down, and all kinds of stuff, and you don't know why, but all this calamity is happening to you. Um, and then some people can actually work to develop that skill. But yeah, they're fairly easy ways to fend it off if you know what you have to know what's happening to you. But yeah, I mean, people can cause harm to you spiritually. I mean, the just like people can cause harm to you physically, people can try to impose their will on you physically. You can resist. You can, if somebody points a gun at you and asks for your wallet, maybe you'll give it to them. Maybe you'll run away. Maybe you'll call the police and they'll get arrested. So the spiritual world's not much different than that, other than it's, there's less direct physical action. But cursing goes back forever. We find curse tablets in ancient Rome, and Greece. They used to carve these horrible curses into lead tablets and throw them into wells. Probably poisoning their own wells, but in wells and chasms and stuff. And they, when they do digs, they'll find hundreds of these things stacked together, and they'll, like, be naming people. So and so, may all your hair fall out, and that sort of thing. So there's a long history of cursing, and I have to think, you know, I've experienced it, and so it's very real to me. But if it wasn't real, if something wasn't happening, I don't think people would keep doing it, right? Like, if they couldn't get an effect out of it, I don't think it would have been such a thing for such a long period of time. And there are there were spiritual people throughout Europe, especially, who specialized in breaking curses. So you might have heard of cunning folk. That comes from the
Hmm.
British Isles, right? Cunning folk were specialists in, they were, might be healers, but they're also specialized in sort of breaking what they considered witchcraft back then, which was cursing. And in the same thing in Scandinavia, and there's lots of terms for it in Scandinavia. The one I'm thinking of is similar to cunning man or cunning woman, is klokkgubbe, which means wise old man, and or klokkguma, which is wise old woman. But the connotation is the same. It's somebody you go to when you've been cursed, and
Hmm.
break those. But that exists all over the world as well. So if it weren't a thing, I don't think it would continue to exist. But I've seen it, I've experienced it firsthand. I've, a lot. My work that I'm doing now is, the writing that I'm doing now, and the classes that I'm working on now are actually around spiritual self protection. And given my background in martial arts, given my background in information security, and my background in shamanism, stuff sort of coalesced around that. I've been doing a tremendous amount of research as well.
So I'm going to be really curious to know what your answer is to my next question, because this is one I mentioned. This is a subject that is important to me, and the next question kind of zeroes in on why I think it's important. Um, I'm wondering what you think about this. Do you believe that if person A or shaman A is going to curse person B, that person B has to be at a relatively similar vibrational level? Like, like you were saying, the person who's doing the cursing is going to be pretty angry. So if somebody is at a really high happy level, it's not going to work so well. But if he's at a lower level, it's going to work better.
Um, I don't think "has to" is the word that I would use to describe that, but I think it hurts. If somebody is already down, so if you think about when you're tired, right? When you're really tired, you're more likely to get sick because your defenses are down.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are in, and when you say vibrational state to me, I think of emotion, right? I think of
Mm-hmm.
like
Right.
that's the easiest thing I can relate to vibrational state is if you're in a painful, low, depressed emotional state, you're more likely to get sick. You're also more susceptible to the energy of spiritual attack because having when you're up and you have a lot of energy, it does act as a shield. It acts as a form of protection. You have a spiritual immune system, so to speak, that you can keep up through keeping your emotional energy at a good level. It's not to say it can be hard for people to be happy all the time. I'm not saying that has to happen, and
Right.
for people who are going through depression, it can be impossible. While they're in the depths of depression, but um, yeah, I mean, I think there's a resonance that can be tapped into there that when your energy level is higher, when your vibration is higher, to use a level analogy, um,
Mm-hmm.
stuff tends to bounce off you more. You tend to be more protected. What's going on your energy body level is that your energy pathways, the circuits are cleared of gunk and are working correctly. So there's not much for a curse to cling to or hit or whatever. So a big part of what I teach from a self-defense perspective is not breaking or deflecting curses. I call it spiritual hygiene. And that's just taking care of yourself at a
Mm.
spiritual level so you don't become susceptible to those things.
That makes sense to me because that's really the view I've taken. That, and the way I often express it, and you may disagree with this, and that's okay. The way I've expressed it is you really can't control somebody else in any way spiritually without their permission, for lack of a better term, without their cooperation in some form. And cooperation can be taking the form of just being in a similar vibrational space.
Yeah.
It could be willing to be susceptible in some way. I mean, there has to be some sort of a connection, because like you pointed out, we're
Yeah.
all connected. There has to be
Yeah.
some sort of connection going on there, and it has to be sympathetic in some way.
Right. Right. So if you look at a lot of, I don't disagree with you. I think where it becomes tricky sometimes for people to understand is that this can be very unconscious. That connection can be not something you're
Sure.
necessarily aware of upfront until you are,
Hmm.
until you're very aware of it. But a lot of the ways people curse, in traditional ways, involve talking about sympathetic spiritual action, sympathetic magic, getting a piece of clothing that somebody wore so you can get hold of something that contains their vibration, or getting a clipping of their hair or their nails, or something like that, so the practitioner can attune to their vibration, and there's sort of a channel there for the curse to follow, like a homing beacon, I guess.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
another way, and this actually, this happened to me. A practitioner who was attempting to curse me threw garbage into my yard. And I was like, "What's going on here?" And I talked to two different readers. I was like, "I think somebody's cursed me," and the first one's like, "Yeah," and it was because they threw something in your yard. I was like, "Oh yeah, okay." And the second person I talked to confirmed that was indeed what was going on, I thought that was what was happening, but it was easy enough to protect from. It was easy enough
Hmm.
because I work on spiritual hygiene all the time, and so if my vibration was particularly low, it would have been much harder, and it would have had a bigger impact on my life. And as
when
it
you
was easy to
wait,
shrug off.
when you described the garbage going into your lawn, my initial reaction was, well, he was pissed off. He couldn't pull it off, so he decided he'd litter on your lawn instead. It was the best he could do.
Yeah, I think it was actually I think that was part of the cursing. I think that was intentional.
Oh, really?
That's a common hoodoo cursing technique, is to throw something in somebody's pathway, so they step on it. So there's like hot foot dust and goofer dust, if you ever heard of this stuff. So
I
there are
never
these,
have.
yeah, so they're like these powders and potions that they'll scatter across somebody's path, or throw onto somebody's property to kind of, I guess, infect them with bad spiritual energy, for lack of a better term.
That's one of the interesting things about. I mean, I don't know a lot about this. Don't get me wrong. Like I said, I haven't talked about this in 5 years. So it's not like this is an everyday topic around here. But it is kind of fascinating, and one of the reasons it's fascinating to me is that even in this very spiritual practice, and we're talking right now in low vibration spiritual practice where people are cursing and so forth, even in that range, it's amazing how often people want to affect things spiritually by affecting things physically.
Yeah, yeah,
I can't seem to just fling my spirituality at them, so I'm going to do a physical thing in order to make it happen. Which is, once again, it's doing the same thing we all kind of mistakenly do. We try to accomplish something spiritual by doing something outside.
right, right. Well, we live in the physical. Our consciousness most of the time is in this physical,
Yeah, sure.
outward physical reality.
So it's
So
understandable.
yeah, unless you're in a shamanic trance all the time, which I am not. I'm not in. I couldn't maintain it for that long. Um, so yeah, I mean, you can do everything on the spiritual plane. You absolutely can do all of this stuff. But there's a long tradition of physical components to these things, and as you said, sympathetic magic or sympathetic spirituality, where I take something that looks something else, like a voodoo doll, or
Mm.
also called a poppet. Or I take a piece of somebody's hair, or I throw stuff into their yard, or all these things. So yeah, you're right. There are people who are trying to do something physically, uh,
Hmm.
to manifest something spiritual. But yeah, I mean, it's not 100% necessary. I think it gives us something to sometimes lean on, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, well, the crutch is the word that came to my mind. It's a
Yeah,
crutch. It's like I don't feel confident in doing it spiritually, so I'm going to do the physical thing because that makes me feel like I'm doing it spiritually.
yeah. Although there is, I mean, speaking of manifestation and doing something physically, I have a student recently that I had her do an exercise, and I was talking about. So for me, one of the ways I conceive of manifestation on the spiritual level is doing spiritual activities to affect the probabilities of things. So
Mm.
everything, we exist in this field of quantum probability.
Hmm.
And if I want to win the lottery, for example, I've got to affect a tremendous amount of probability, because the odds are, 300
Yeah.
million to one. Um, but because you cover the law of attraction, there are ways this works, and there are ways that make it harder.
Hmm.
And so I had her do a shamanic journey to what we call the spirit of chaos. So we conceive of everything as a spirit, and like chaos is all this probability swirling around. And to get a physical action she could do that was random, easy to perform, but would increase the likelihood of whatever it was she was trying to manifest on the physical plane. Um, and it's interesting what comes up when people do this journey, when people do this work. And you know, it's more an exercise than anything else. It's more like, I want you to do this and see what happens, and
Hmm.
get this information from this source, and also realize that chaos and order are really two sides of the same coin, like yin and yang. Like, we live in a chaotic world, but there is also order overlaid with that. So I haven't heard back from her yet, but I will be curious to hear
Yeah.
what happens when she carries through with this action that's unrelated to the thing she wants to manifest.
Yeah. Yeah. we're running out of time, and it's kind of sad because I mean, one of the things I wanted to explore, we won't have time to explore. You mentioned how shamanism believes that spirits inhabit everything, and I've been mentioning a few times lately here on the podcast that my view of the universe has shifted a lot since I started doing the
Hmm.
podcast 10 years ago, and it has shifted to the degree that I used to believe, like you, I was very left brain. I was in IT, you were in IS, so very closely related. Um, I believed that the universe was basically dead. It was basically just a bunch of stars and dust and so forth. And now my view is completely shifted, and I now believe that everything has energy in it. Everything,
Hmm.
I mean, even just blank outer space has energy in it. It's like energy is in everything, and it's a very dramatic shift.
Yeah.
Like, and I can just see this being like this huge conversation that could take another hour, but we don't have time for it. But I'll give you a minute. You could do something in a minute.
I'll say this: there is a recent theory that dark matter, which makes up most of the universe, but we can't observe except inferentially.
Right?
Um, there is a theory that it's not matter at all, but it's information.
Yeah,
And
I heard that. I read something on that. One of the science magazines had that.
yeah, it's really new. It's a
Yeah.
really new theory, and who knows what will pan out. But um, to me, everything is, really when I say everything is a spirit, I'm talking about like we are we are inseparable from consciousness. There's consciousness everywhere in everything, even in the vacuum of space. The fabric of space, the very fabric of space time is contains consciousness. In fact, we don't experience anything outside of our consciousness because we
Mm.
can't. Everything we experience is in the world that our consciousness constructs for us. So to me, that is the real miracle, that I can sit here and have a conversation with you, and these little vibrations in the air that hit my eardrums get turned into the subjective experience of speech, or I
Right.
can listen to a symphony that's pre-recorded and have the experience of listening to a symphony, um, even though I have no direct experience of that. It's just arising in my consciousness, and to
Yeah.
me that is amazing. Like that is
It
the
is.
miracle of the universe.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. Well, I mean, I wish we could go on for another hour. I understand now why some people do 2-hour podcasts. I get it. I
Uh-huh.
don't think I could do it every day, but I still appreciate it. But before we finish off for the day, I do need to give the audience an opportunity to reach out to you in case they're interested. So tell people, how do they find out more about John Moore and what he does?
Absolutely. So, my website has links to everything that I have: my blog, my podcast. I even have an app now because come from a IT background, and that's mainshaman.com, and it's Maine, the state, MaineShaman.com.
We have the app in common, except mine's broken. I'm in the middle of trying to
Oh,
fix it right now. Yeah, but
yeah, that's fun.
well, when you have that eye of the IT or IS background, you kind of have to do it after a while, right? It's like
Right.
Pokemon. Yeah,
Yeah.
otherwise you get kicked out of the club, right? They won't
Right.
let you in anymore. Oh, but this has been great. It's been really, really fun, and I loved hearing all the things you had to tell us about. I loved hearing about your. I like your view of shamanism. I mean, I've heard a number of different versions over the years. I like yours a lot. It's very much in
Thanks.
alignment with my own spiritual beliefs. I never thought of myself as being shamanistic. You're actually convincing me maybe I am. So,
I, we all are somewhere. It's in our
this is
family.
true.
It's in our family tree somewhere.
Meanwhile, poor Einstein is trying to figure out why everything is going spooky on him. But
Right.
I thought it was a great word, actually. I mean, he was describing a very specific physical event, but
Yeah.
nevertheless, it kind of covers what we're talking about here. And it was a good word, spooky. It's a good way
And
of
it covers
describing it.
that connection to everything. We are
Yeah.
entangled. Everything in the universe started out as a particle smaller than an atom 14 billion years ago. So we are entangled with everything, even on a physical level.
And look at us now.
And look at us now. Now we have toasters.
Now we have toasters. Well, we just answered the question that Douglas Adams posed, right? What is the answer to life in the universe and everything? It's to have toasters. All
To have
right.
toasters,
There
yeah.
we go.
14 billion years, and now we have toasters.
Well, it's nice to know that evolution had a purpose, right?
Right.
Oh, it's been great, John. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
And thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.